Well, hello everyone. We're sorry we are a little bit late. We've been having some technical problems, which is very normal, right? But we hope to solve this problem and the other speaker can join us. Okay. Um, I would like to welcome all of you to the 13th edition of SolinEnglish and Other Languages. For those who don't know me, my name is Diogenes, and I am the coordinator of this project together with my colleague, Suede Fawazi, who is the vice coordinator. Today, we're going to have a roundtable with the participation of three of the most renowned Brazilian applied linguists. They are Kanavillil Rajagopalan from UNICAMP. Hajan has also been a professor at the PPGCEL, which is the Programa de Pós-Graduação em Letras, Cultura, Educação e Linguagens, da UESB, for quite a while now. Telma Gimenez, from Universidade Estadual de Londrina, and Sávio Siqueira from UFBA. Both Hajan and Savio have been participating in several academic activities at UESB for a long time. It's always a pleasure to have been able to count on these two good friends of mine whenever they are invited to help us. This is Telma's first time with us, and we hope that many more times will come, Telma. It's a pleasure to have you here today. I would like to thank these three scholars for accepting our invitation to share with us their knowledge, experiences, expertise, and expertises, and the research developed in the field of language teaching and learning and language education in Brazil. In fact, the general theme of this roundtable today is challenges and opportunities in foreign language education in Brazil, a topic that I consider of great importance due to the problems that we have been facing regarding foreign language teaching and foreign language teaching preparation programs in Brazil and perhaps around the world. To moderate this discussion, we have invited Laís Lobo. Laís is a member of the organizing committee of this event, together with Sandra Sayuri and Karine Cardoso. Karine is an analyst of the language laboratory at UESB, the CALI. As I have said in other occasions, these three women are the foundations that support SolinEnglish and other languages. Okay, so let me now talk a little bit about Laís, who is going to moderate this roundtable. Laís is by nature a teacher, as she describes herself. She has been an English teacher at the public school in the state of Bahia since June 2013, a place she describes as the best in the world. Since last year, Laís has been a volunteer writer of English language learning notebooks, a material provided by Secretaria Estadual de Educação to support remote classes during the pandemic. In addition, she also acts as a replenisher volunteer of digital education resources for central rooms, a resourceful tool for teachers in Bahia. Laís has a master's in languages, cultura, educação e linguagens from UESB. She has also a degree in English language and literature from the State University of Bahia. She is a specialist in clinical and institutional psychopedagogy. Laís studied English teaching methodology at the University of Miami in the United States of America. And she's interested in education for social change and how to make use of language learning to make social connections that lead to personal growth and human development. So please, let's welcome Laís Lobo to moderate this roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Professor Gimenez, for the introduction. And thank you all for being here with us this evening when we are going to have a wonderful meeting. To me, it's a great honor to be here and to moderate a roundtable with these giants of linguistics, applied linguistics in Brazil. So let's start talking about Hajan, as his students used to call him. As Diogenes has said before, Hajan is a full professor and retired collaborator in the area of semantics and pragmatics of natural languages at the State University of Campinas, and researcher 1A of CNPq. He participates in postgraduate programs at the State University of Southwest Bahia and the Federal University of Tocantins. He was born in India, where he obtained a BA in English Literature, University of Delhi, of Kerala, Masters in English Literature, University of Delhi, and Masters in Linguistics, Delhi University. He earned a diploma in applied linguistics at the University from Edinburgh, Scotland. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from PUC, São Paulo, and a postdoctorate in philosophy of language, University of California, USA. He has already published 6 books in more than 600 texts, articles in national and international reviews, summaries, book chapters, prefaces, presentations, and texts in Congress proceedings. In addition to contributing to entries, chapters for encyclopedias since 1996. He has served as one of the editors of Delta magazine. In 2015, he was named one of editors of World magazine in New York. In December 2006, he received the Academic Recognition Award Zeferino Vaz. So he has been also my professor when I was doing my master's. Thank you, Hajan, for coming, and thank you for your presentation today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good to be here back again. I've been on this event several times before, but it's always a great pleasure to be back here. For this presentation on this panel, I chose a topic. I chose the heading deliberately. And the heading of my talk is going to be learning a foreign language and making it one's own. Okay? Now, many people might think, oh, that's very strange. How can you learn a foreign language and make it his own or her own? And I think they are absolutely right. There is a fundamental contradiction between the two parts of this title. Either you learn a foreign language, can keep it as foreign, or make it one's own. You can't have both. Both can't happen at the same time. And this is because there is a profound sense in which you can say that there is no such thing as learning a foreign language. You never learn a foreign language. Because if you learn it, if you learn the language really, it is no longer foreign for you. So either you learn a language and make it your own, or keep it foreign, in which case you don't learn it at all. And that's why I said the two halves of this title are essentially contradictory. And that's precisely the reason why I chose it. I want to highlight the contradictoriness of the two halves of this title. Okay. Because, when all is said and done, I truly believe that learning a language or working on a language is much more than just a linguistic job. There is a number of other things also involved in working with a language, learning a language, acquiring a language, whatever it is. Because one thing that happens when you learn a language is that every language is a window on a certain set of cultural practices, right? This is obvious. And what we don't realize is that every time you come upon something that you're not familiar with, be it a language, be it a culture, whatever it is, you are profoundly affected by it. In other words, what I'm saying is that contact with a language, any language for that matter, contact with any culture is a game-changing kind of situation. It affects your personality. Language profoundly affects your personality. And this is a known fact. Once you learn a language, you are no longer the same person that started the business of learning the language. Before learning the language, you are one person. After learning a language, any language, you are a completely different person. Language affects you in that sense profoundly. Now, when I say this has been said before, but I suspect that many of those people who bring up this idea are essentially speaking from a monolingual perspective. That is, you start from the assumption that there is a language that you can always call your own, and the languages that you can't, for some sense, call your own are the other languages. Okay, that you have your own language on one hand, and you have other people's language, and then that's one reason why many applied linguists point to a distinction between learning a language versus acquiring a language. You acquire your own language, your mother tongue, what some people call mother tongue. Okay, you acquire it. You don't learn it. Learning is a conscious business. Acquiring is by and large unconscious. A baby, a child learning the language, it is not aware of any linguistic practice going on. It just picks up the language from its mother's lap, as you would say. Okay, but then I think it's a famous applied linguist, American applied linguist called Stephen Krashen, if I'm not mistaken, who brought up this distinction. And it was the time that, okay, that's fine, that looks fine. But then the more I thought of it, the more I became very skeptical about this. Today, so much so that I don't believe in it at all today. I don't believe that there is a viable distinction between learning and acquiring. It's what you call a climb. It's a smooth passage from learning to acquiring. You never know where one ends and the other begins. Okay. This is because my own take on language is essentially from a multilingual perspective. And that has to do with the fact that I myself was raised in a multilingual context, namely India, along with many other countries in the world, most other countries in the world, in fact. India is a multilingual country. And I was raised in a trilingual family. I grew up in a family where there were 3 languages being spoken at the same time. There was my mother's mother tongue, my mother, what she called her mother tongue. It's a Dravidian language. Dravidian language is the set of languages spoken in the southern part of India called Malayalam. My father, who came from the north, spoke an Indo-Aryan language. It's an Indo-Aryan language called Hindi. And then I was born at a time when India was a British colony, which means English was introduced some 200, 300 years ago in that country, and English is largely circulated in the country. So when I was a child, I grew up speaking 3 languages at the same time. Okay, and I had no idea that I was speaking 3 languages. To me, it was just one language with different ways of speaking. Okay, there was one language I would speak to my father, another language I speak to mother, and they were just 2 different ways of speaking the same language. I had no idea that there's something called language. This idea of meta-awareness of language was introduced to me much later, years later. As a child, I had no idea. And this is very common practice. Children all over the world, no matter where, growing up with 2 or 3, sometimes 4 languages at the same time, they are hardly aware of the fact they are speaking 3 different languages, 4 different languages. For them, it's just one language. And that's why some applied linguists in general have argued that the word language is no longer suitable for describing what the child is going through. Instead, it makes much more sense to talk in terms of linguistic repertoire, repertory linguistic. It's not just English only, it's English along with some other language, along with some other 3rd language, 4th language. Okay, and this is very, very typical of countries where 3, 4 different languages are spoken. Just to give an idea of what it means to grow up in a multilingual setting, but I can still remember that when I was a child, growing up as a child, my dad used to subscribe to 2 different newspapers. One early morning, it would come to the house. It was called Mathrubhumi, a newspaper which is published in Malayalam, in a local Indian language. And the afternoons, another man would drop by and give us a second newspaper. This is a national newspaper published in English. It's called Indian Express. There were 2 different languages. And when I started going to school, I had to pick up all the languages. In India, we have another situation called a 3-language formula, which was introduced in the country as early as the 1950s. Every child who has been to school in India, per force, has to know 3 different scripts. He or she has to be able to read and write 3 different languages. So I can still write. I don't speak Malayalam anymore after nearly 50 years of loss of contact with the people. I have practically forgotten most of my. I still believe that the language must be latent in my memory. If I go back to the situation where people are speaking, I think in a matter of half an hour, 1 hour, I may recall some kind of, I might be reasonably proficient in Malayalam. But now practically it's all lying dormant in my conscious memory. So 3-language formula means this was introduced by the government of India to introduce some kind of national unity, so that there are common languages for all the people, because people speak different languages in India, and there has to be some kind of common languages. Today, that is done either by English or by Hindi, the 2 languages that are most widely spoken in the country. Now, talking about multilingualism, multilingualism works in very strange ways. When many of my listeners now might think of multilingualism as an individual achievement, an individual, a solitary person learns one language, learns another language, and he or she becomes a multilingual. Sure, there is individual multilingualism, but the kind of multilingualism that I'm speaking about is basically societal multilingualism. Vocês conhecem a palavra societal? Societal, em português, agora está usando a palavra societal. Palavra traduzida literalmente do inglês. Societal multilingualism é quando a sociedade inteira usa mais do que uma língua. Então, não é mais algo que um indivíduo solitário pratica. So many people, many others are speaking the same language. It's a complete hodgepodge. Sabe a palavra hodgepodge? It's a tremendous confusion in the sense. People are speaking different languages at the same time, yes. And that's one of the experiences you can have in countries like India. If you go to Nigeria, the same thing. If you go to Kenya, in fact, mostly the ex-colonies of Great Britain in Africa, because I'm talking about English here. Now, the same thing happens if you go to the French Francophone Africa, same thing happens. French, instead of English, they have French. And even Portuguese colonies of Angola, and if you go to Angola tomorrow and you find the same thing. They have Portuguese, and then side by side with Portuguese, they also have a host of native African languages. Now, when you have this a group of people, a society as a whole, speaking a large number of languages at their disposal, okay, it's very curious how things happen. Esse tipo de multilingualismo, onde, ao invés de uma só língua, repertório de línguas que estão circulando, what happens is a phenomenon called translanguaging. Isso é ambiente propício para essa translanguaging, translinguagem. Okay? What is translanguaging? Translanguaging is a curious phenomenon where you mix languages freely, which is what I'm doing now. Okay? Estou fazendo exatamente esse translanguaging. Okay? I start a sentence in English or Portuguese, ended up in English. I am deliberately choosing these two languages because if I speak the other languages that I also speak, it's going to be total confusion for you, all right? So, but this happens all the time. It just happened that last week I was talking to one of our panelists here, Sávio, Siqueira, Professor Sávio Siqueira from Universidade Federal da Bahia, que vai aparecer já. We were exchanging WhatsApp, and he suggested that he had come across a new film, Indian film, which was just won awards and all that. It was in Netflix. I went to see that movie a couple of days ago on the Netflix, and I was utterly disappointed. It didn't at all come up to my expectations. And I wrote to him saying that the only good thing it did was it made me go back to the India of my old days, because the film was spoken mostly in Hindi, in colloquial Hindi, right? And that was refreshing to my, okay, I remember. Yeah, at the beginning it was all very strange, but it just took me 5-10 minutes and I was absolutely at ease. I could understand everything that is going on. But then there was a curious phenomenon. Some of the characters in that film, they're speaking not Hindi all the time. They're speaking another language called Bengali. Bengali is the language they speak in and around Calcutta in India. And I remember as a child, a very small child, I used to speak some Bengali reasonably well because my next door neighbors, they were Bengalis. And I used to go to their house and play around. So I was fairly conversant with Bengali. But then, I tell you, when I watched this film, I was clearly stumped. I had no idea. My Bengali had gone all, rusty. And I had difficulty. Now, why am I saying all this? Because when you grow up in a multilingual context, what happens is that you are quite at home with some languages, not so much well versed in other languages. Okay, so that you can't say that you are in full command over all these languages that constitute the repertoire, and that makes this multilingual interactions all the more complicated, if you see what I mean. Now, I want to focus on translanguaging. Okay, I think one of the we make a tremendous mistake when we teach foreign languages, so-called foreign language teaching, and say that okay, the students have to only English is allowed in my class, nothing else. It has to be complete immersion. That's the technical term they use. Okay, language acquisition, language learning by total immersion. You don't speak any other language. I think that's a whole lot of bullshit. Sorry for using that word, but that's all I can think of. This total immersion makes no sense at all. I think if you want to take a model for language learning context, I think it has to be eminently this multilingual context, where people are absolutely at ease switching from one language to another. They don't care two hoots about what language they're speaking at any given moment. They're much more interested in getting their thoughts out. Okay, they want to speak off their chest, not bothering about what language they are speaking and how they are speaking it. Okay, it depends so much more on to whom they are speaking and about what subject, because they are good at speaking about something in a certain language, some other thing in some other language, etc., etc. And translanguaging is I think not just a phenomenon that's being observed all over the world, increasingly observed. This becomes the routine thing, because in what's happened in the last 20-30 years is migration across the world has risen to a level that languages are getting all mixed up in, and this is happening all the time. Think of the number of foreign words that have crept into Portuguese, modern Portuguese, just in the last year, thanks to the COVID thing. I read in a newspaper that the German language alone has acquired something like 5,000, 6,000 English words related to COVID, Anglicisms. Okay. Now imagine the number of words that have crept into these languages. This is something unimaginable, say 20, 30 years ago. So what I want to, I'm going to conclude my thoughts here, saying that I want to take up the point with which I started the conversation. There is no such thing as learning a foreign language. Okay? What we learn is something that comes to enlarge our linguistic repertoire. We become linguistically, as it were, richer, communicatively. We are much richer by having our contact with other languages. So there I draw my talk to a close, and I'll pass on the words to the organizers. I want to, before I end my talk, I want to congratulate the organizers of this event for bringing up this fantastic topic for discussion. And Professor Diogenes is to be congratulated, especially because he has taken this torch all along the way. And I also want to greet my fellow panelists, Savio and Telma. I'm sure they're going to add their thoughts, wonderful thoughts, to this panel, making it a lot more interesting than I've been able to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hajan. Wow. wonderful presentation you provided us today. Thank you. And let's continue with the topic that we are discussing this afternoon. Now we are going to listen to Sávio Siqueira in the topic Challenges and Opportunities in Foreign Language Education in Brazil. And his presentation will be Why Offering English the Red Carpet is a Shortcut to Marginalization of Other Languages and Threat to a Multilingual Education in Brazil. Savio holds a doctorate in Letras and Linguistics from the Federal University of Bahia. He's an associate professor at UFBA, Institute of Letras. As an applied linguist, he has a special interest in the following areas and themes: teacher training of languages, cultural studies and linguistic education, teaching English as international language or lingua franca, World English, approach criticisms of English as international language or English as as lingua franca, teaching, English language social linguistics, imperialism, post-colonial English studies, applied critical pedagogy, teaching languages, transculturality in language education, as well as reflective practices in teaching and learning language. He is a certified leader at the research group English as Lingua Franca, Criticism, Attitude, and Identity, and exercised for 2 mandates the coordinator of graduate program in language and culture from UFBA. He's a permanent professor at PPG Link UFBA and the Master in Letras and Linguistics at University of Tocantins. In extension, he exercised the academic orientation of English language of the permanent nucleus of Extension and Research Institute of Letters at UFBA for 10 years, and currently he serves as general coordinator of the project for biennium 2018 to 2020. He led postdoctoral studies within the themes of English as lingua franca, critical pedagogy, and production of teaching materials in the Department of Second Language Studies at the University of Hawaii. He has also a CAPS Fulbright scholarship. So I'd like you to welcome our next lecturer, Savio. And the stage is yours.
Hi. Hi, Laís. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so, well, good afternoon. Thanks, Laís, for this wonderful presentation. And I have to say I'm sorry because I'm broadcasting from my cell phone because my computer here, we had a problem with the sound. So then I'm improvising, talking to you through my cell phone. So then I have sent my slides to Laís, so then they will help me project the slides to you. But before I begin, I'd like to say thank you to Diogenes and Laís and Sandra, the organizers behind the SolinEnglish. So it's always a pleasure to be with these very special colleagues and friends. And of course, my pleasure to be in this discussion with 2 very special friends, Hajan and Telma Gimenez. So thank you very much again, Diogenes, for this invitation. And I'm sure we're gonna have some fun. It's always complicated to talk after Hajan, because he, in a few words, he says a lot. So as this roundtable is about challenges and opportunities in foreign language education in Brazil, so Hajan was more general in his talk. And of course, I'm going to approach a few things that he mentioned, as I'm going to talk a little bit the multilingual turn. So my presentation will be, of course, I'm going to talk about multilingual education, but my presentation will be, will have some focus on multilingual education in Brazil, and of course, foreign language education, and discuss a few things related to what I call, offering English the red carpet when it comes to, to foreign language teaching in Brazil, especially because of due to the BNCC. And I'm sure Telma will conclude with very interesting insights related to the teaching of foreign languages in Brazil. So then, the title is a long title, but I hope I can manage to handle the whole story here. But then it's why offering English the red carpet is a shortcut to marginalization of other languages and a threat to multilingual education in Brazil. This may seem exaggerating, but actually I'm going to throw in some ideas and issues for us to reflect as teachers, as teacher educators, as researchers, students of foreign languages in Brazil, but of course considering not only foreign language teaching, but what if we can put under the umbrella of multilingual education? Okay, so before I go into the discussion of the multilingual education, I'm going to talk a little bit about the multilingual turn, which basically complements a little bit of what Hajan touched here when he referred to, translanguaging, etc., etc. So, Laís, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to very briefly refer here to the multilingual turn and a couple of authors that have been discussing this. And of course, this is an issue that it's pretty update in Brazil too, right? So the study of multilingualism has recently moved away from a view of languages as separate bounded entities to a view of communication in which language users employ whatever linguistic features are at their disposal to achieve their communicative aims as best as they can. Of course, this takes us to what Hajan just mentioned, the people's repertoires or multilinguals repertoires. And of course, because of this, let's say this move, a number of terms have emerged according to different authors, according to different, ways of investigating the phenomena, let's put it this way. So the terms like flexible bilingualism, code meshing, contemporary urban vernaculars, metrolingualism, polylingual languaging, translanguaging, translingual practices, just to name a few. So I think this it's easy to understand that there is an increasing focus on super diverse linguistic context and on people's complex communicative multilingual and multisemiotic repertoires. So, and of course, we are here talking about views of language as a social resource without clear boundaries, which places the speaker at the heart of the interaction, right? So then the territory of the language is the speaker. Can you go, please, next. Then, so According to a few authors, for example, concerning the multilingual term, McConney and Pennycook would tell us that these are the ways in which people of different and mixed backgrounds use, play with, and negotiate identities through language. So then identity comes to the center of this whole process. Kanagaraja refers to linguistics of contact, complex language awareness, metalinguistic competence, multilingual repertoires as starting points, and of course, he uses the term translingual practices, as much as translanguaging. But then it's interesting because I put this reflection here by Blumart, because he says something interesting, and it is for us to reflect. He says that the contemporary semiotics of culture and identity need to be captured in terms of complexity, rather than in terms of multiplicity and plurality. Of course, this is open to discussion, because he argues that, for example, the multi, pluri, inter, cross, trans notions, all these prefixes may suggest that the encounter of such separable units produces peculiar new units, as if they are separable units. So then I think it's something also for us to reflect upon when we think of linguistic, cultural, and semiotic repertoires. And then that's why a few authors prefer to refer to the very famous term, Bakhtinian term, heteroglossia, as it refers not to fixed bounded languages, but to the heterogeneity of signs and forms in meaning making. So that is within this multilingual turn. So then there've been several ways of conceiving the phenomena in different areas: sociolinguistics, applied linguistics, critical applied linguistics, etc., etc. So, and then here we are based on this. So to think about the implications to language education due to the increasing linguistic diversity in classrooms all over the world, including Brazil. So what it means is that and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, that our classrooms, our language classrooms are becoming much more, let's say, diverse than in the past. So next, please. So then, still within the discussion now, but bringing English to the center. So there are authors that say that when it comes to language education, in many contexts, languages like English play the role of killer languages. And this Hajan knows a lot about this, especially in countries like India, in some other countries in Africa, where English is given prominence over mother languages. And of course, several authors would say that it plays the role of a killer language instead of playing the role of a healer language, as an Indian author would say. So multilingual education can be a bridge from the home language, the mother tongue, to the regional language and the national language, as well as world languages like English. So even though this is in some areas in Brazil, this is let's say a faraway reality, but we do have this, and especially when it comes to mother language learning, and involving, for example, groups from indigenous communities and some others that I'm going to refer to. So, and then in many contexts, so there is a concern about what they call subtractive education in the dominant language amounts to denial of linguistic human rights in education and to some authors, it is a crime against humanity because simply, the dominant language comes and erases, the mother languages or the indigenous languages that are, at play. So multilingual education is about developing a mindset to overcome the barriers between what some authors would call the monolingual stupidity and multilingual promise. So this is just to give us an idea of what this multilingual turn has encompassed or is encompassing, recently. Next, please. So very briefly, I'm going to just show here that when I'm talking, of course, the multilingual turn involves a lot of, societies that are, more visibly multilingual, but we do live in a multilingual country. And I put in what I'm going to briefly talk about here is exactly to reinforce that idea that Brazil is not a monolingual, or we just speak a few languages, but then it's a multilingual country. And I'm going to bring some data that I'm sure everybody has, is familiar with. But anyway, so and also I have here this book that was published in 2017 that was edited by Marida Cavalcanti and Teca Maia from UNICAMP, whose title is exactly Multilingual Brazil, Language Resources, Identities, and Ideologies in a Globalized World. And here, this map, you have, you can see several languages, indigenous languages still spoken in Brazil. Next, please. Very briefly, we live in a diversity of numbers of 250. So this data from the EPOL is from 2019, 250 languages, 100 indigenous languages, 56 what do we call migrant languages, and of course we have also the sign language, Brazilian Sign Language, Libras. So estimates suggest that around 1,175 indigenous languages in 1500 when the Portuguese arrived. Of course, several multilingual contexts in this country and groups of different mother tongues. Communities like São Gabriel da Cachoeira in the state of Amazonas, where 4 languages hold the status of official languages: Portuguese, Nhangatu, Tucano, and Baniwa. So, but there is one thing that we need to consider here. Despite the country's great linguistic diversity, many speakers' relationship with their own languages is usually unequal in relation to Portuguese. And then there is this general perception that Brazil is a one-language country, right? So believe it or not, this perception is still very present in our everyday, let's say, lives. So there is, of course, a visible imbalance between the use of Portuguese and other languages, which in many ways places Portuguese as a continuous threat to indigenous languages and those of immigration. So, but this does not at all make Brazil a monolingual country. On the contrary, this linguistic complexity is increasing at a fast pace. And I'm going to show, next please, here, of course, I'm not going to explore this because of time, but then just for you to have an idea, this data comes from the Observatório de Migração, and just to show you that in one year, and here we have just by months, so the number of people from different countries who came to Brazil and also seeking as refugees and also as asylum seekers. So then you can see here, for example, several countries: Venezuela, of course, Haiti, Argentina, Bolivia. So in January 2020, we had around 17,000 people coming to live in Brazil and to stay. So this is just for migrant registration. And then next, please. For requests for refugee status, the same thing. So Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, China, Bangladesh, Angola, Syria, Senegal, India, Colombia, and many others. And these maps show, I mean, the maps show in 1 year, January in 2019 and January 2020, the number of, let's say, people seeking refugee in Brazil, and in places like Roraima, more than 5,000, registers. In places like São Paulo, Paraná, Mato Grosso, so we had over between 1,000 and 5,000 registers. So then, that's why I'm saying this landscape is becoming much more diverse and complex. So, and then the question is, how welcome is this super diverse linguistic landscape in Brazil? And how welcome is this language, super diverse linguistic landscape in Brazil? And how prepared and willing is our educational system to include such increasing diversity? So, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, as I'm trying to approach linguistic education, I'm going to talk about linguistic education in general, and then focus a little bit on English. Yes, next, please. Oh, here I make a list of official documents where language education is touched upon, and with different characteristics. For example, of course, the Brazilian Constitution guarantees the indigenous communities to use their mother tongues, in their teaching and learning processes. Then we have the Lei de Diretrizes Básicas, 1996, where there was a mandatory foreign language teaching, but not necessarily one specific, was a language of choice. Then there is this federal decree from 2010 that creates the National Inventory of Linguistic Diversity, and then the PCNs of Ensino Médio, the PCN Plus, the OSCENs, and of course we have here, and I'm pointing out this because it's important in this discussion, the law 1116, 2005, which is the Spanish, as people say, a lei do espanhol, right? Then came the reform of high school, so the Ensino Médio in 2017, and of course it established the mandatory teaching of English. So then the other ones became, let's say, optional, and it was a loss to many efforts made, especially by teachers of Spanish and all the professionals involved with the teaching of Spanish in the country. And finally, we have the BNCC. That was we had the last version in 2017, and of course, I like this where it says that there is a prevalence of two hegemonies. Portuguese as a mother language and English as a foreign language. So these are official documents that touch the language education in our country. Next, please. Then I'm going to briefly talk about this, the Diretrizes Curriculares Nacionais para Educação Plurilingüe, and then they use the terms bilingual, multilingual, plurilingual. All these prefixes appear in the document. It is a resolution that was published in 2020, last year. And here I summarize what comes up in this resolution. So they talk about indigenous education, education of the deaf, education in border areas, and what will interest us, let's say, the most, by plurilingual education. And then they use more the term additional languages than foreign languages. So they talk about Latin America, but then in Latin America, they refer to an effort of Latin American countries to reach levels of proficiency in English, and not talking about the other languages. So, and then there is a search, according to the document, for an integration of the additional language in the school curriculum. So we know this. Then, according to the census, they use data from the census. Then Telma is going to use the census in her presentation. There is a demand for additional languages. There is only 3% of private schools offered at that time some type of bi or plurilingual education. But of course, the document refers to some initiatives and projects in the public sector and in different states, in different cities, where bilingual and plurilingual experiences in the public sector. Then there comes they also, of course, they point out the role of the BNCC, where English appears as mandatory, but other languages can be offered, but not. And then it said that not only those of social prestige, but also indigenous, even African languages, which is something rare, including our state of Bahia, even though at UFBA we have the teaching of African languages. So, and then despite all this, in my view, that is, discussed in the directrices, so undoubtedly it is English which is offered the red carpet. We know that. So despite the fact that we talk about all these possibilities, languages of choice, not languages of low prestige. This is not a good word, but anyway, the languages that are not the ones dominant ones, it is English which is offered the red carpet. And then I'm going to discuss this, exactly this, the red carpet to English. Next, please. So the red carpet to English, and then you can see there the red carpet. Why English? Of course, we know why English. So the language of globalization, professional success, modernization, opens doors to a brighter future. And of course, and this is in the introduction of the BNCC, and we have been discussing this, not only myself, but colleagues like Ana Duboc, Telma, and Clarissa Jordão, and many others. So it is introduced, the concept of English as a lingua franca, and of course, the scholars or ELF scholars have been talking about English as a multilingual franca, or a multilingual orientation to English as a lingua franca, especially Jennifer Jenkins, considered one of the mothers of the ELF area. So, but then, of course, we know why the red carpet to English. It is a process fueled by a neoliberal ideology that equates English with economic success. It is couched strongly in a neoliberal discourse of economic development. There is a utilitarian motivation. And of course, it brings that idea of English as a commodity that Clarissa Jordão has been talking about this, and it's not new. Of course, some authors see this as an imperialist and neo-colonialist orientation, and of course, as an exercise of coloniality. So, but we know that the development and promotion of one powerful language is privileged at the expense of the other languages. That's what I mentioned at the beginning, the marginalization of other languages, and even languages of prestige like Spanish, German, Italian, so European languages, which form part of the local ecology. And Mejia talks about the Latin America in general. Not only she's from, she works and lives in Colombia, but she mentions, Latin America as a whole. So, and I like what this Mexican colleague says about these languages become otherized. So they are just the others. So one takes the red carpet and the others are the others. So since they are perceived as inferior to English and not worthy to be learned or promoted. So this whole discourse of, the language of globalization, professional success, modernization, etc., etc., etc. So then puts the other ones as otherized languages. Next, please. So within this discussion, so it's interesting to talk about bilingual education in Brazil, because this is becoming a buzzword, and of course a lot has been flourishing in bilingual, or in what we call bilingual education, right? But what I have to say is that, of course, I cannot be so update. I don't know, but bilingual education in Brazil in foreign language teaching context still means English, including CLIL experiences and projects. So, and mostly evidenced as an elitist enterprise. So, of course, there are, as I said, there are, public experiences in the public sector, but there is a whole, there is whole evidence showing that bilingual, what we are calling bilingual education, that we may evolve to, multilingual education, is still, it means, let's say, most of the time English, right? So, and then there is this criticism brought by Ofelia Garcia some years ago that I think it's still valid thinking about it. She says that most bilingual programs are grounded in a monoglossic perspective, which views monolingualism as the norm and treats bilinguals as two monolingualism, one or as two monolingualisms, or double monolingualism. So then, and then when we talk about repertoires, and those who are more familiar with translanguaging, we know that translanguage, for example, is not like double monolingualism, right? So this author says also, which is important to that second language acquisition in the TESOL industry is still treat the acquisition of an additional language as an ideally hermetic process, uncontaminated by knowledge and use of one's other languages. I'm not saying that this happens in Brazil, but we know that a lot of foreign language teaching is still takes place around those premises, right? And then, why is this important? Why we should discuss this? Because there is a tradition towards monolingualism, the native speaker model, etc., etc. But as I said at the beginning, the landscape in this country, the linguistic landscape and cultural landscape, has been changing and fast. So, with increased mobility, classroom diversity in Brazil calls for strong public policies of multilingual education, especially when it comes to the pedagogy of additional languages. So then what happens? We are going to receive, for example, out of my experience, to have a foreigner in my language classrooms is something, I would say, unusual. But of course, there are many situations in the country, not even the border situations, where more and more people are coming, or more and more bilinguals and multilinguals are coming to our schools to learn Portuguese, but also to learn additional languages. So, and just for you to have an idea that this landscape needs to be taken into consideration, I have here this is from a paper in 2018 in Paraná that says that the number of foreign students in Brazil has grown 112% in 8 years. So of course, most foreign students go to São Paulo and second to Paraná. So then this landscape has been changing. So I remember Fernanda Liberali referring to very interesting projects teaching Portuguese to Haitians in São Paulo and in other communities that come to live in the country. Okay, next, please. So then, having said this, of course, this roundtable is to talk about challenges and opportunities. So I think I talked a lot about challenges because not only to multilingual education, but especially to our foreign language education as a whole. So then I would say that my point here is not to demonize English. On the contrary, I know it's important. I know English is the language of is a global lingua franca, but we need to struggle to implement a real democratic multilingual education of additional languages based on choice, not on obligation and privilege. Of course, there are thousands of counter arguments saying that, okay, if we teach at least English successfully, it's a good beginning. I understand, but we should not, simply take this for granted, because when it comes to language, when it comes to society, so I don't think nothing mandatory, nothing, obligated. It's, to me, it's healthy, right? So then, as much as ELT, for example, English language teaching, is connected to neoliberalism, so global opportunities, etc., it also just juxtaposes with the local linguistic realities in which it is being implemented. So this is important, for example, when it comes to the role of English as a lingua franca. What do these students need English for, right? So do they all want to be these, what is expected in terms of the neoliberal agenda, etc.? This is a point for us to discuss. So I believe that we should open up the scope of foreign language education, right? Reincorporating or incorporating a diversity of languages to be taught under a multilingual perspective, because again, our students are becoming, more and more diverse, and of course, investing especially in teacher education at all levels for them to be able to handle with this new and complex landscape that comes to them and to us. I also thinking of some let's say proposals made over the years by Ofelia Garcia and the team of scholars that works with her. So work on alternative local core standards, so local curricula, etc., which comprise different progression of what multilinguals or multilingual students are able to do using English. So, and in their languages other than English. So, and of course, materials, testing, assessment, also along those lines. So then considering, the different models and different perspectives and different realities, and also the different students that come to us, especially those who are, bilingual or multilingual. And of course, I'm going to mention here different initiatives involving, groups of work, researchers, teacher educators, teachers, students, and other stakeholders for a more inclusive multilingual education, both, in all the different realities that I have mentioned, but of course, in additional language education too. And I brought here just an example, that recent example of the Projeto Brincadas, together with Alabi and teacher associations from different languages, including the Hispanistas, French teachers, German teachers, etc. So who are requesting Congress, a couple of hearings in our Congress in order to discuss the bilingual multilingual education. And then I have here, next please, the if you are interested, for those who want to have a look at, so they have an enquete where you can click on the links and cooperate in terms of or add more, to the request of. So we need people to vote and go there. And the idea is to have these hearings to discuss linguistic education and the teaching or additional language education in Brazil. So that's why I talk about challenges, opportunities, and actions. So to finish, I would like, since we give English the red carpet most of the time, even though I don't demonize English, of course, but I brought here this passage, and I want to finish the talk with this passage by a Polish writer. Her name is Olga, I don't know if this is the right pronunciation, Tokarczuk, and she won the Booker Prize in 2008 and also the Nobel Prize, 2018, I'm sorry. And the original book is Bieguni. I don't know if this is the right pronunciation again in Polish, but it was translated into English as Flights. And she talks about the what it means to be monolingual in a monolingual of a global language like English. So, and then I finish here with this message. It's a very short section called "The Tongue is the Strongest Muscle." So there are countries out there where people speak English, but not like us. We have our own languages hidden in our carry-on luggage, in our cosmetics bags, only ever using English when we travel, and the only in foreign countries to foreign people. And only in foreign countries to foreign people. It's hard to imagine, but English is their real language. They don't have anything to fall back on or to turn to in moments of doubt. How lost they must feel in the world where all instructions and the lyrics of all the stupidest possible songs, all the menus, all the excruciating pamphlets and brochures, even the buttons in the lift, are in their private language. They may be understood by anyone at any moment, whenever they open their mouths. They must have to write things down in special codes. Wherever they are, people have unlimited access to them. They are accessible to everyone and everything. I heard there are plans in the works to get them some little language of their own. One of those dead ones no one else is using anyway, just so that for once they can have something just for themselves. Of course, this is it's interesting, is an allegoric idea how interesting it is to be the speaker of a global language, but it's much more interesting to be a multilingual speaker, right? And here I have the same in Portuguese. If those who are interested, and the book was translated as Os Vagantes. And of course, I have to thank Clarissa because she posted that on her Facebook page, and many people had access to this. So if you are interested, so this is it. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you, Professor Sávio, for your presentation this afternoon. And let's move to our next presenter. Telma is going to talk, to continue with the presentation tonight, and she's going to talk about supporting English language teaching policies, what census data can tell us. Let's learn a little bit more about Telma. Telma Gimenez is senior professor at Universidade Estadual de Londrina, at the postgraduate program in language studies. She holds a PhD from Lancaster University, 1994, where she developed a study on teacher education complemented by postdoctoral research at the Institute of Education in 2014 on globalization and English as a lingua franca. After many years of experience as a teacher educator and coordinator of projects with school teachers, now she supervises research on English language teacher education, English as a lingua franca, and language policies. So, welcome, Telma. Thank you for being here. And
thank you.
It's your turn.
Boa tarde, good afternoon. It's an immense pleasure to be here among my colleagues, dear friends, great scholars, and to welcome you to this final part of the session. I hope you're sitting comfortably. I know it's too many hours sitting, looking at a screen is not very nice, but I hope you'll find something interesting in the conversation that I would like to have with you. I'm going to start by thanking Gimenez and his team, especially Laís and Sandra, for the help today and for the invitation to be here. I think I'll need Laís' help in sharing the slides, please. Can I have your help? Thank you. Okay, I hope I will be able to see that. Otherwise, I'll have to start sharing my screen instead. Laís, do you think this is all I'm going to see? This is the size I'm going to see?
Yes, Telma, I'm going to make it bigger, and then we can check if it's okay for you.
Okay. Yes, at this stage of my life, I cannot see a small print. I'm afraid. It's too small for me. Otherwise, I think I can share the screen and maybe better because there will be some slides with numbers and I'm not sure I'll be able to see them clearly. Okay, let's try. If it doesn't work, I'll try to switch to my own slides here, and I hope that will work. Thank you.
Okay.
Can we go to the next one, please? I'm going to continue the conversation that Hajan and Savio started, but slightly changing the focus and trying to narrow down the conversation on language policies, and especially language education policies for basic education in Brazil. I decided that perhaps to help you move along with me in this conversation, I would try to divide it into 4 parts. The first one is a very brief one. It's just commenting on what Savio and has just mentioned, the fact that we have had some, I wouldn't say a full-fledged language policies in Brazil for foreign language education, and then think about what should policymakers do if they do want to change the status quo and try to make an impact on language learning, especially languages other than Portuguese in our educational system. And then I will narrow that down to using census data to do that, and then argue that we need to change the conversation about why we haven't been able to be successful in foreign language teaching or the teaching of languages other than Portuguese in our educational system, which means that we need to reframe an old problem that has been with us for quite some time, and all of us have heard of time and time again, that we are not very good at teaching languages, especially foreign languages, in our schools, especially public schools, although that's not just restricted to public schools. Next, please. Laís? Okay. So let's assume we have had some foreign language policies in the past, and that basically meant that we had a choice of which language students could study in schools. Of course, the conversation so far has been mainly in terms of multilingual societies or multilingual Brazil and at a broader level. I'm here focusing more on acquisition policies, language acquisition policies, and how governments have been implementing actions in order to make sure that people learn languages in the schools, especially in our context in Brazil. And the idea that we had a choice, in theory, we had a choice, but in fact, most of us would recognize that the preferred language, or not the preferred, the most offered language in the school curriculum was English. Until the 60s, perhaps, it was French or other languages. If our study goes further back in time, other languages competed for the same place in the school curriculum. But in fact, the idea of choice that was there was not a very strong one. Many students didn't have any choice. They had to study whatever subject was offered to them in the schools. We can discuss this in the question time. I hope we'll have time for that. And then what we are increasingly recognizing is that this choice was replaced by now an obligation to learn English. So while English was seen as part of a wider basket, let's say, of foreign languages, now it's the only one that is available to us. So this should bring opportunities as well as challenges as well, because if in the past English was the most offered language in schools and it's now compulsory, it means that we can have clearer goals. We can have perhaps more detailed actions planned, because we don't have to deal with the diversity of languages. I remember once when we asked some government officials why we didn't have assessment for foreign languages in the schools, for instance. They said, well, there are too many. It's very difficult to design tests for all the possibilities. Although we didn't have so many possibilities, but that was the reason or the excuse given at that time. So now we don't have any more excuses. We know that we have one language that has been elected as the primary language, other than Portuguese, to be learned in schools. So BNCC, for instance, is now able to, the people who have written the BNCC now have the possibility of detailing more clearly what the syllabus could be. Whereas in the past you couldn't, because you were referring always to foreign language, although in many cases foreign language meant English. So there are opportunities, I would say, for us to focus on this in terms of policy making. And of course, this greater focus would be helpful for other languages as well. And I agree with Savio that ideally we should be more languages being taught in schools. And whatever I'm going to say here would apply to other languages as well. But let's take English as now the only language in the, at least officially, the only language that is compulsory in schools, and see to what extent having that language as the only one in the curriculum, albeit not what we would like to have, would give us in terms of planning for this to be done in an efficient or in a way that people will be happy with the results. Next, please. So the question for us, and I think it's a question that all of us, especially academics, but anybody can try to answer this question and approach it from their own perspectives and their own possibilities of action. How can we create opportunities for more equitable English language teaching, recognizing that we haven't done a very good job at creating equity in this learning process or in this teaching opportunities that we have been offering students in the schools. Next, please. So one way to do this, to answer this question, how can we have more equitable English language teaching? Learn from other experiences, right? There are plenty of suggestions and inspirations from other countries and what other governments have been doing, what other policymakers have been doing. There is no shortage of experiences abroad that we can go for inspiration. One of them, of course, is one quite often cited, the study by Pearson in 2017 that studied especially countries in Latin America in relation to English language learning and suggested that we would have to have global English standards. So some people would look for answers in standardization, and they have been quite influential currently for obvious reasons. So this is one way of addressing the question. Next, please. So in that study, you can see that Brazil, when compared to other countries in Latin America, didn't have most of the items that are indicated there in terms of goals, establishing goals, both for teaching materials, for the legal foundation, in relation to student achievement. Next, please. And teacher qualifications. So Brazil is the second column, and you can see that we haven't scored well in comparison to other Latin American countries. And here we have Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Peru, and Uruguay. So we were not doing a very good job. And the answer, according to these people, would be to look for standards and create standards in order to have a more equitable foreign language teaching in Brazil. In this case, English language teaching specifically, since we're now dealing with this compulsory nature of language learning. Next, please. Another way to address that question, of course, is to look for a quick fix. You all have seen, I guess, this recent visit to the Minister of Science and Technology by someone who has this incredible methodology to teach English. And I think the minister was considering buying that program for our schools. That would be one way of trying to address that problem. Next, please. Another one, of course, is to try to find the reasons why we have this situation. And so, again, we also have lots of people giving explanations why we don't learn English in schools. So, por que não se aprende inglês nas escolas regulares? This site mentions several factors, including and starting from inadequate methodology, right? Next, please. So the search for culprits also has to do with the curriculum, because teachers cannot go beyond verb to be. Yeah, so this is also a very widespread discourse that teachers, everybody's always learning the verb to be, no matter which stage you are, what year you're studying. That's always what teachers teach. So methodology, curriculum. Next, please. Other sources also would say teachers are the problem, basically, because they don't know the language they are teaching. Other factors are also mentioned: inadequate teaching materials, and I'll show you one slide in a moment that will also reinforce that idea, that materials are not adequate, that there aren't enough hours for learning English in schools, as students are not motivated, classrooms are under-resourced, salaries are not good, and all these factors, in fact, may be compounding to this very bleak picture of why we are not progressing in terms of foreign language learning in our schools. Another way of trying to address the question is not trying to guess what the reason is, but also start from understanding the issue. What is going on? Why haven't we been able to teach a foreign language in the past, or even now, in the way that we would like to do? We have lots of research in applied linguistics. Most of these studies are qualitative studies. Yesterday, I just carried out this very, very brief search on the Banco de Teses da CAPES, and the keywords ensino de inglês result in almost 700 titles. Aprendizagem de inglês, almost 400. Língua inglesa, 4,300. So there are lots and lots and lots of studies, especially qualitative studies, on the situation of English language and English language teaching in Brazil. So if I am a policymaker and I am interested in addressing the question that I posed, I would start by trying to understand the issue and look for studies that could help me understand what's going on, so that I would have more knowledge about what to do, and not just follow hunches or try to listen to people who are not necessarily involved in understanding what is going on. Next, please. Another point that I would like to make is that in order to answer that question, we should avoid easy and often wrong answers, like this one that we saw when Mackey said in 2018 that about 85% of teachers who teach English to schools, in public schools, do not know the language. Yeah? This is a very misleading headline, but it helps create a discourse that has become very, very frequent in the media and in many, many circles, that a deficiência nos cursos oferecidos pelas universidades e a falta de oportunidades para praticar a língua inglesa são as principais causas do problema. Why are they saying that? What is the basis for this statement? And this is complemented by Silvia Donini, who is no longer at MEC. I think she's now Secretary of Education in one city in the state of São Paulo. For her, melhorar esse quadro passa por uma reformulação do currículo das universidades. And she says, no Brasil, a formação em geral é bastante teórica e menos focada em questões de conversação e proficiência. Isso não corresponde à demanda da prática em sala de aula, que é uma abordagem comunicativa. Precisamos fazer uma revisão do currículo dos cursos de licenciatura e corrigir esse problema que tem sido muito comum. O professor de língua inglesa não é um falante de língua inglesa. Isso faz com que o estudante não tenha uma referência de conversação. It's true, actually, because this teacher does not have a degree in languages. This teacher does not have a degree in the area that he or she is going to teach. And instead of focusing on that, we're saying the problem is that teacher education programs are not teaching correctly this prospective teacher. Next, please. So if we start looking at the raw data that has been collected in the schools about the situation of foreign language teaching in Brazil, the census data, I know we have many qualitative studies. It provides us with a very rich picture of what's going on. But for policymakers, it's very important to have the broad picture of what is going on and what are the roots of the problems that we have. Why can't we meet the goals that we have established for our education? So in 2015, the British Council was already developing some research on why we have so many problems with the teaching of English. And according to the census data at the time, only 38% of the teachers had a degree in foreign languages. So if I have a degree in mathematics and I'm teaching English, of course, there is no reason to expect that I would know English necessarily. Yeah? Among other factors that you will be able to read later when the slides are available, they say 38% dão mais de 30 aulas por semana entre inglês e outras disciplinas. Ok? 65% lecionam 2 ou mais disciplinas, geralmente língua portuguesa. So, if I am a teacher who does not have a degree in a foreign language that I'm teaching, and I have this kind of workload, you can't expect much from me. I'm doing the best I can. And the question is, whose responsibility is it? Next, please. So what I'm arguing here is that we need to look at this kind of data in order to get some insights for policymaking, because we need to understand where we are where the causes are, who is responsible for what's going on. Definitely not the teacher. And if we look at the data, and I'm looking specifically at the data about the fact that teachers do not have a degree in the subjects they are teaching. If we look at the census data, Censo da Educação Básica, you will see that they group the kinds of degrees that teachers have in 5 groups. So the first group, Grupo 1, is the one that has docentes com formação superior de licenciatura na mesma disciplina que lecionam, ou bacharelado na mesma disciplina com curso de complementação pedagógica concluído. Grupo 2, docentes com formação superior de bacharelado na disciplina correspondente, sem licenciatura ou complementação pedagógica. Docentes com licenciatura em área diferente daquela que leciona ou com bacharelados nas disciplinas da base curricular comum e complementação pedagógica concluída em área diferente daquela que leciona. Docentes com outra formação superior não considerados nas categorias anteriores e docentes que não possuem curso superior completo. There are teachers, according to the statistics, in all these groups. As you have seen, the Group 1, which is now, this is according to a new revised nota técnica. So you have, in Grupo 1, teachers with licenciatura or bacharelado, okay? And only 38% had that. The others were all belonging to the other groups. Next, please. So if we look at the data for 2020, which is data collected in 2019, referring to not 2019, although it was collected at the beginning of 2020, before the pandemic. You can see here that for anos iniciais, and you can see that the census records that we have turmas com docentes com formação superior de licenciatura ou equivalente na mesma área da disciplina, grupo 1, ok? And here you can see that the subject or the area that has the lowest number is língua estrangeira. So, em anos iniciais, professores de língua estrangeira são os que têm a qualificação mais desalinhada com o que seria esperado para este grupo, para esta etapa da escolarização. Ok? Next, please. Anos finais do ensino fundamental. Again, língua estrangeira is the subject where teachers have the qualification that is least aligned with what they are teaching, only 39.5%. At ensino médio, it gets a little bit better. Next, please. Because we have sociology that's worse than língua estrangeira. Okay. Again, this is about língua estrangeira. We don't know how much of this is about English, but we suspect the majority. But from now on, the census will include only English as the data to be collected in the next questionnaires. And so we will have a chance to see to what extent, how much of this was only English or other languages as well. It will be possible to have this fine tuning of data to be able to understand the role of other languages, other foreign languages, and the composition of the teaching staff, and also in the alignment of their education with the subjects they are teaching. Next, please. So the next census will bring a change in this classification, and group 1 will be formed mainly and only for people who have licenciatura. Bacharelado will be group 2. Because remember, so far we have had licenciatura and bacharelado com complementação pedagógica as part of group 1, and those were the percentages for group 1. They're also going to collect data on teachers who teach other languages, and the only ones that are mentioned are Spanish, French, German, Italian, and Japanese, which means that at least at the level of the questionnaire, these languages are considered and will have specific data about them. I think this is an important progress in terms of having data that will enable us to have a clearer picture of what languages are being taught and what kind of qualifications these teachers have. Next, please. It's interesting that most of the studies that have tried to explore this census data from INEP is the British Council that has produced several reports aiming at unpacking the huge amount of data that is there. And they have recently published this report in which they also present data about who the teachers are, and you can have a better picture of how many are qualified in terms of having a degree in English in order to teach English. Next, please. And then if we look at data from the Censo da Educação Superior, and we want to understand, for instance, why we have so many teachers of English or foreign languages with degrees that are not in a foreign language or in English. Why is that? Aren't we educating enough teachers? Are governments hiring teachers without any consideration of what degrees they have? Are teachers tapa-buraco, let's say? I know this is not a very good expression, but what is going on? Why do we have so many teachers teaching English or another foreign language without proper qualifications? Next, please. Sorry, no. Let me stay here. I'm trying to understand whether we have enough courses or enough students taking letras courses in order to fulfill the demand that is coming from both private and public sectors. Here you have the data for the número de matrículas em cursos de graduação e licenciatura. You can see that most of the licenciaturas are taken at a distance, and 46.7% in-person courses. Next, please. And that helps explain part of the picture. So the question is, do we have enough teachers? Where are these teachers being educated? Apparently, we would have enough teachers, but where are they being educated? Here you can see that most of them, cursos de licenciatura, of course, I'm not here referring specifically to letras inglês or letras línguas estrangeiras. I'm saying licenciaturas in general. Most of them are taking courses in private universities. Okay. So private universities are educating the future generation of English language teachers. Next, please. Sorry, you already there. And if we look at the number of courses with licenciatura, you can see that we have here letras português, inglês, formação de professor, e letras inglês, formação do professor, and that sort of makes 65,000 students taking licenciaturas in 2019 in Brazil. That should be enough. But the problem is that these teachers are being educated at a distance, most of them at a distance in private universities. So next, please. For this reason, I think this data will help us change the conversation. So instead of talking about we don't learn English in schools because teachers don't know English, and full stop, they don't know English because they haven't been educated. They haven't received professional development in order to do that. And whose responsibility is it? So what I'm arguing is that if progress in English language learning has been slow, we need policymakers to take their share of responsibility. We can no longer hide them and by saying that it's teachers' fault. It's the policymakers, it's the employers, the people who are hiring professionals who do not have qualifications to teach a foreign language. If we are serious about a policy that aims at improving language learning, we need to take these data seriously. And mainstream media needs to stop listening to those who only blame teachers or bring magic solutions, who blame teachers for lack of proficiency for the poor learning results in basic education. The mainstream media is, they are very, very efficient in creating discourses about what's going on and what's wrong with our schools. But they get it wrong, and they had to be held accountable and say, look, the data is not showing this. What we have from the census is not showing a different picture. And it's high time government officials stopped paying lip service to improving ELT, started paying attention to the statistical reports produced by INEP. And I hope INEP will be strengthened, not weakened, as we watch with great concern, great preoccupation with what's going on. And it's very worrying to see what's going on with all these educational institutions and agencies. And finally, if I can have the next one, we have to recognize the role of the private sector in maintaining the status quo, because they are the ones who are educating the teachers. The final point is that the British Council, in order to provide more detailed analysis and information about all this data that is available, but it's a huge database. It's very difficult to dig through the data, and they are organizing this data and making it available in this website. Actually, it's the website of the Observatorio de Língua Inglesa. That's the website address. And among other things, the Observatorio is collecting a lot of information and also disseminating research done in Brazil about English language teaching in schools, especially public schools. And if you haven't visited yet, I recommend you do that and watch that space, because soon there will be a launch of more data analysis looking at especially questions about gender and social inclusion, looking at more detailed data to understand who the teachers are, where they are, and what's going on with their working conditions, in order to understand better why we have such a problem in our educational system. Thank you very much. Obrigada. Sorry, I went beyond my time, I guess.
Thank you, Telma. Don't worry about the time. let me invite everybody to the room. And then I think we can have a final conversation on the topics. Yes, we have been past. We are here for almost 2 hours, but I think I should share some thoughts about what I've listened today, because I am an English teacher, right? I am at a public school every day, and I teach high school students from 14 to 17, 18 years old. And I think that as it is part of my job, thinking about how can I do that? How can I do my job without imposing it to my students every day? They lack all the kinds of resources, especially here in these moments that we are living, the challenges that we are facing through pandemic. I see that SolinEnglish has done an amazing job today linking the teaching of English that is practiced in the classrooms and the academic special knowledge about it. And this is very important. So I keep thinking, how do I help my students to feel that English is not the other language, but it is also, I think that we have an echo there. Let me turn off the mics a little bit. So I think we can move. Okay. So how can I help my students to shift this thought of this is not my language, this is being imposed to me, and to, of course, I need English for some reason, as Professor Sávio and Professor Hajan has told, they have told before. So I think that this thinking, teachers think about it, it's really important. But it's interesting that to learn something, anything, I have to make it an object of my desire. So to make students feel like English is their object of desire, sometimes we have to sell it as a tool for success. You're going to be successful if you learn English. But of course, we know that they are not citizens of the world because they speak English. They are citizens of the world because of the skills they develop through time, and not to change themselves, but to help them to flow around their choices in life. So English help open those doors. It's very difficult to be in a public school where we have unrealistic textbooks, materiais didáticos completely diverse, and to be in a classroom where the students have to deal with hunger, or these days the lack of connectivity, and still make it important to them. So thank you for the insights you guys shared today. And we have here some comments that I'd like to highlight. We are not going to have time to answer all questions, but I have prepared here some comments on your presentations. So let me share something. I think at 5:05 we had lots of people saying that they loved the presentations. I have here Vanessa Cabral saying Professor Hajan is just amazing. Some people saying welcome Savio, And down there, we have comments on Telma's presentation as well. Thank you, Telma, for this amazing lecture. We have many thanks for the great talks today, wonderful insights, and let's see here. Thank you to the organization of SolinEnglish. It means a lot to us to share such rich discussions. So if you have any final comments, as I told you before, it's we cannot move through questions because of the time, but I think each one of you can share final thought on the presentations.
I'll bell the cat then. Okay. Yeah, I want to. The only thought that I want to present to you is my growing conviction that translanguaging that I talked about so much in my talk, translanguaging can be converted into a tool for language teaching. You know, in the sense that in my own experience, I have felt that part of what is inhibiting language learning, English language learning in the classroom is purely psychological. People don't want to be there, especially adult students, they don't want to be caught making mistakes, grammatical mistakes. And so they sit back. So one way you can relieve them of this burden is by teacher taking the initiative and freely translanguaging. This one example is worth 1,000 words. You know, so you don't say that we are not prohibiting the use of Portuguese in this class. Instead, we are encouraging them to use. Show them in practice that one language is just as good as any other. There's no difference between that. We are playing a game, and the name of the game is language learning. Okay, so we are learning to learn a language, and one way to do it is by translanguaging, and that can make the whole language learning experience so much more fun. And that's exactly what is lacking very often in the classroom. We don't make it a pleasurable experience. We can definitely change the classroom experience into a highly pleasurable experience. Pura diversão. A gente brinca aprendendo a língua. Tá certo? Eu não me lembro como é que diz aquilo em inglês. Ah, dane-se, eu envio português. Porque meu interesse é exatamente isso. I want to play the game. Okay? If I can't find the right word for the right time, problem is there. I'm going to understand that. I mean, translanguaging as a form of as a language learning experience in the classroom, I think that can take us a long way in improving things the way they are.
Thank you, Hajan. Thank you. I think Fabio, Sávio, sorry, would like to say something.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Finally. Well, first of all, I finally found out about the problem here in the computer. But again, as I was telling Diogenes, we teachers learn to live on the cutting edge. So, but anyway, I was very happy to be, with these two special friends that I admire a lot, Telma and Hajan. And this topic is I think we have to discuss more. I think the data that Telma brings to us shows exactly that it's easy to just put the blame on teachers if we do not really go deep and analyze why we still fail in foreign language education. So, and then it's that idea. So if I believe this can have, let's say, important outcomes, because if English, which is probably it is the major foreign language taught in Brazil, we are having these drawbacks. Imagine the other ones, and then we tend to look at the numbers, towards English. So then the tendency is to expect the same, low quality, etc., towards the other languages. So then I think one thing is really, connected with the other. And of course, I agree with Hajan when he talks about translanguaging more and more. Translanguaging will come into our classrooms because, as I said, our classrooms are becoming more and more diverse. So even in places where diversity, in terms of linguistic repertoires, it was not something so common. So, but anyway, I again want to thank Diogenes and you, Laís, for conducting us so well, trying to calm me down, as the problem came up. And I would like to say hello to everybody who's on YouTube with us up to now, and hope we can meet again and discuss more on these issues, because they are extremely important at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sávio. Telma?
Eu quero também agradecer a oportunidade, adorei estar aqui com esses dois grandes ícones da nossa linguística aplicada brasileira, pessoas muito queridas, né, sempre muito provocando reflexões muito interessantes. Eu acho que, se a gente pudesse, a gente continuaria conversando aqui. Por exemplo, eu gostaria de dizer, por exemplo, que translanguaging ocorre o tempo todo nas aulas de inglês. Na verdade, uma das questões é que reclamam, inclusive, é que há muito português na aula de inglês, né? Então, acho que acho que eu tentei fazer uma fala muito mais no sentido de a gente precisa olhar mais a diversidade, né? Não dá para a gente fazer grandes generalizações, é olhar para a diversidade que existe no Brasil, em termos dessa oferta dessa língua estrangeira, de como isso está se dando no contexto escolar, e ao fazer esse olhar mais fino, né, a gente poder pensar em ações que possam contribuir para as pessoas que estão lá, né, na frente, nas salas de aula, fazendo o seu trabalho, que eles possam ter o apoio que precisam para que façam melhor o seu trabalho, que façam o seu trabalho do jeito que eles gostariam de fazer, nas condições que gostariam de fazer. Então, acho que é esse olhar, né, para esses dados que podem ajudar, inclusive, a tirar essa característica tão individualista desse processo, né, e colocar muito mais nos ombros de quem realmente tem essa responsabilidade. Então, agradeço muitíssimo essa oportunidade de estar aqui. Diógenes, obrigada por ter me permitido debutar no seu evento. Adorei, pena que a gente realmente não tenha mais tempo para pergunta, mas ficarei muito feliz se vocês quiserem me escrever, mandar perguntas, quiserem cópia dos slides, enfim, fico à disposição para interagir
Você está
com vocês.
batizada, Telma.
Faltou a champanhe agora. Muito obrigada.
Okay, I think this is it. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I wish we had more time to discuss some of the nice, insights that were treated here and on this round table. Very important subjects, but unfortunately, it's almost 6:30 and a lot of people need to go. Laís herself, she has a class at about 7 o'clock. But as Telma said, you can send questions and the comments to us, or you can send the questions and comments straight to the lecturers, I think they provide their email and contact, so we can do that. And I'd like to say that next week we are going to have the first lecture in French with Lícia Soares. Lícia is a professor from UNEB in Alagoinhas. And it's going to be on the 10th, May 10th. And the following week, the 17th, we're going to have a roundtable with two professors. One is Eric Brun. He's from France, but he's been living in Brazil, and he teaches French at the Universidade Estadual de Feira de Santana. And there is a professor by the name of Patricia Mesnager. She's from France, and she's going to join us for the roundtable. And there's something new. After the roundtable, we're going to have a lecture that's going to be delivered by Sávio Siqueira from Universidade Federal do Sul da Bahia. Okay, so it's going to be a very busy day, you know, on the 17th of May. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
To Telma, to Hajan, to Sávio, Laís, and Sandra, Patricia, who is backstage, you know, Karine, actually, Karine. And thanks to all the participants who came and joined us this evening. It's always a pleasure, you know, to have all of you. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All the best. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Cheers.
Raja.
Good night. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.